Well, you say you want a revolution, but do the people agree? My next guest says Israel's campaign could rattle the Iranian regime into some kind of change, but the notion that airstrikes will lead to a popular uprising is little more than fantasy. Arash Azizi is a contributing writer for The Atlantic, and he joins me now on his recent op-ed, "The War Isn't Helping Us." Arash, great to have your perspective on this. You know, Tehran alone has nearly 10 million residents. You're not just a writer, you're Iranian, and you talk to Iranians who are living within these strikes right now. Do they desire a regime change?
I think they certainly, would like to see democracy in Iran. They would like the regime to go. They would like a different direction. They want, they want peace. They don't want the sort of war path that Islamic Republic has been on with the countries around it. But that's something very different than having a sort of ability to stage a revolution or having any sympathy for Netanyahu's claims as to being his calls on the Iranian people, his alleged sort of empathy for them. For that, I think they're much more skeptical. They're horrified by what the war has meant in already a week. Hundreds of innocent civilians dead. The little regard that Netanyahu so clearly has for the Iranian people and their civilians, the kind of threatening of them, I think has sort of put them off. And they look at the future with a lot of worry. But I do believe Iranians want a different path, and a different foreign policy. And the current war has convinced them even more that they don't need this kind of aggressive foreign policy that the Islamic Republic has followed.
And just to follow up on that, I want to bring back these images of the protests that are taking place right now in Tehran. We should point out, Arash, right, that this is organized by the government. These are not the well-known anti-regime advocates that try to get cell phone video and get it to the United States. I think it's important to point out that this, what we're seeing now on the screen, is organized by the regime. Yes?
That's right. I mean, any government would be able to stage a demonstration like this. And look, there might be a slight number of population who wouldn't have joined this protest before, but maybe now they'll do it under sort of the pressure of war or how angry they are with Israel. But this kind of opinion, the one that wants to sort of continue this hostility to the West and Israel, does not represent most Iranians, I think. I think a demand, if I echo demands, but by some popular political figures like Mustafa Tajzadeh, a former deputy interior minister who is now in Evin prison and sort of well-known political prisoner, he says we want two things. We want a ceasefire. We want this war to end. We want Israel's aggression against Iran that has threatened the territorial integrity of our country to cease. But we also want a democratic transition. And I would say short of a democratic transition, we want to change in the type of foreign policy that has gotten us into this war. We have no reason to be at war with Israel. Iran and Israel, two nations, have no reason to be at war with another. And there's no reason for innocent Iranians and Israelis to die fighting each other, as has happened in the past 7 days.
And I want to follow up on that peaceful transition to democracy in just a minute and what that looks like and how do you achieve that. But just to go back, since you've talked to a lot of anti-regime advocates from decades past, we've witnessed past protests inside Iran when folks are able to get video and get it to the States. We've seen the repression. So why haven't those past protests and freedom movements led to regime change?
I think the main reason, which also hampers us today, is that those of us opponents of the Iranian regime, like myself, the Iranian opposition, we failed to bring about a organized opposition that could actually offer a real alternative to the regime. We failed on that account, and that failure has continued, unfortunately. We do not have a sort of organized network that could fight and bring down the regime and offer an alternative. That's why the task of democratic transition is going to be long, and we will struggle for democracy. We have a struggle for democracy in this country since 1905 at least, and our constitutional revolution, and not just democracy but justice, gender justice, social justice. Those struggles will continue, but unfortunately there is no realistic possibility of a popular movement being able to bring down this regime in the short term.
So then how do you create that popular regime? What do anti-regime activists tell you? Because if it isn't done properly, and you've pointed this out, that bombings and a war creates, economic disaster, hunger, homelessness, innocent people being killed. So how do these anti-regime activists tell you, especially ones with decades of experience, how do you create that peaceful transition to democracy through an organized popular regime? How does that even begin?
I think the best case scenario in the short to medium term we could have is some sort of a changes inside the Iranian regime. I think Ayatollah Khamenei is 86 years old. This man is a total failure. He has brought nothing for Iran but international isolation, economic destruction, ideological rigidity, domestic repression, and now a war. So not only he did all of these things, he's now also entered our country into a war we could ill afford. And I think the many people, not just of the populace, but even those around him and the Iranian regime, figures, they're unhappy about it. So I think, we're going to see some sort of a change. Either Khamenei would be put aside, or after he dies, which is 86, so it's not that far off in the future, we'll see some changes there. But when there is a bit more of a breathing space, when the civil society can breathe, we can continue fighting for things. I'll say there are two sort of conceptions of change. One conception of change is that there has to be one big event. We bring these bad guys up and then we'll put some good guys up there. And that doesn't always work out that way. I think a lot of anti-regime activists that I speak to, a lot of social activists, they sort of see it as a more protracted fight for the values we believe in, like democracy, like justice, and that they'll continue. Like, look at, for example, the Iranian woman who fought for years against compulsory hijab, and they've gained an important victory now. The compulsory veiling has not been lifted, but by their civil disobedience, they have imposed on the regime effectively. The regime does not impose it anymore. It does not impose the laws on compulsory hijab anymore as much. I mean, it does a little bit sometimes, but not as much. That's why there are millions of women without head covering today in the Iranian streets. So I think more favorable conditions and an end to war would provide for a better ground for civil society to continue its struggles.
Yeah, you make a good point. Never deny the power and strength of an Iranian woman. That is for sure. I know many, one of whom is one of my best friends, Arash Azizi. Really appreciate your op-ed, your writing, and just your insight. It gives us a different perspective. I appreciate you, Arash. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.